What if the forest answered you with your own voice before you spoke? What if a light moved through the trees without a body to carry it, turning when you turned, stopping when you held your breath? Tonight, we will follow those whispers into the mountains, where the paths are older than the maps and the dark feels alive against your skin. Welcome back to Whispering Abyss. Settle in, dim the lights, and listen closely. From an unseen whistler that knows your name, to a wandering lantern that marks the living like it marks the dead, to a church that moved its graveyard but not its secrets, every tale tonight builds a mystery that tightens with every breath. Which story chills you the most? Tell me in the comments, so I know what to bring you next time. Story 1. The Whistler on Coldiron Ridge. What if the sound calling you in the dark spoke in your voice first, then in a voice you miss, and only then in its own? My name is Lena, and last autumn I returned to my aunt's cabin on Coldiron Ridge to collect what was left of her. She had left me keys, a pantry of jars, and a note that felt like a hand closing gently over my mouth. If you hear whistling after sundown, do not answer. If it says your name, do not answer twice. If it reaches the porch steps, do not open the door. I told myself the note was mountain superstition. The truth is that the first night made me a believer in small, careful ways. The road up from the highway turns to gravel, then to ruts, then to a track that decides where you drive. Pines on both sides press close and let their needles talk to the roof of the car. The lake below the ridge holds the day's last light like a bruised coin. I parked, shouldered my duffel, and felt every board of the porch complain under my boots. Inside, the cabin waited as if someone had stepped out to fetch wood and never returned. Dust lay where it liked. A sweater draped itself over a chair in a shape that remembered shoulders. On the kitchen counter, under a magnet shaped like a trout, I found the note and the transistor radio. I turned the knob until a warm wash of voices filled the kitchen. Weather, a farm report, a baseball score from a place with a name that tasted like cornmeal. The radio made the room feel lived in, which was brave pretending. I boiled water for beans, cracked a jar of tomatoes, and watched my breath smoke the glass. The sun slid behind the pines and left the porch in a single movement, like a deer stepping sideways out of sight. That was when I heard the first note, clean and simple, the kind of whistle a person makes while they button a coat. I stood still. The sound pushed at the windows, held, and faded back into the trees. I told myself it was a bird. I told myself it was someone on the old logging road. The note came again, longer now, and on its end rode a breath that sounded like a question. I locked the door, slid the chain, and turned the radio a little louder until static stitched its thin net across the room. When the whistle came a third time, it added two syllables that did not belong to it. Lina. The cadence was off, as if it had learned my name from paper. Morning brought plain chores. Firewood, a stubborn pump that needed a patient kick. I hiked the dirt road to the general store, where the bell over the door sounded like an apology. When I told the man behind the counter that my aunt had passed, he nodded once and gave me the look people save for a name they know only from mailboxes. I mentioned the whistling with a half laugh that was supposed to make it light. He did not laugh. Up on Coldiron, he said, "You keep your teeth shut after sundown. People around here know that." He slid coffee and lamp oil across the counter and left a paper bag between us like a fence. On the way back, I stopped at Eli's. He was the nearest neighbor by a long walk and my aunt's good friend. His porch boards had more repairs than mine. He had a scar that ran up from his eyebrow, like a piece of lightning that had changed its mind. I told him about the note. He told me I should be strict with my name and soft with everything else. He said think of the ridge as a place with habits, not a place with rules. Habits can be nudged. Rules get tested. He told me to leave the radio on at sundown and to keep a line of salt like an idea across the threshold. He said he had learned that from my aunt. That night the radio murmured the names of towns farther down the valley. The whistle came when the last color left the trees. It started on the slope and circled, never stepping on the porch, never touching the salt. Each time it passed the kitchen window, it tried my name again, making the vowels short, then long, then twinned as if two mouths had agreed on nothing. I said nothing. The radio cracked and settled. I stood with my hand on the back of my aunt's chair and tried to slow my breathing until my ribs obeyed. I slept badly and woke to prints on the porch. Not boot prints. Not the tidy ovals of deer. More like someone had tapped each step with a bundle of sticks. They stopped at the salt as if a boundary had risen that they could not imagine but could still feel with their skin. I swept the line clean and laid a new one. Then I walked the old logging road to see what the ridge kept during the day. The logging road moves around the mountain like a rope looped around a wrist. Here, and their small cairns of white stones rise to knee height, patient and exact. My aunt had told me once that the road, used to carry timber and later carried hearses when the snow made the main route impossible. Up near the highest bend, there is a clearing of birches. Their pale trunks hold scars that look like careful eyes. In one branch, a loop of blue thread hung and turned very slightly in wind I could not feel. It looked like trash and also like an answer. I did not touch it. The clearing watched me without moving. When I returned, a mason jar sat on the porch rail. Empty, its lid beside it. No tire tracks in the damp. No new footprints. I set the jar inside and could not shake the faint smell of pond water from the glass. On the lid, 4 scratches had been made with something sharp. They almost formed letters, but they would not commit to human order. At dusk, the whistle did not circle. It held in one place on the slope, repeating its clean note like a nail tapped again and again into old wood. My name did not come on the second call, or the third. It waited. Then my aunt's voice lifted from the dark and sat in the kitchen with me. Lena, honey, come help me with the jars. I turned the radio louder until a preacher in a baseball game and far thunder made a braid across the room. The voice outside tried again in my aunt and could not get through the noise. So it found Eli. Lena, you got to see this. The first time, I stepped toward the door before I remembered what Eli had told me. The second time, I put both hands on the table and felt my knuckles go white. Then I tried my own voice, so exact that my spine felt the click of bone memory. I answered nothing. The jar on the table fogged a little, the way a glass fogs when someone talks too close to it. That night, Eli came with a lantern and showed me how to tie thread around a windowsill without nails. He said knots remember what mouths forget. He told me I should hum nonsense if I had to make sound. Songs hold doors open. Nonsense knots them shut. He fell asleep in the chair after the weather report. I woke him before midnight and watched the lantern bob down the road like a careful star. When the last light left the trees, the whistle returned and stayed outside, patient and sure. By the third night, a storm had collected itself on the far ridge. The radio slipped and caught as the air thickened. I made tea. I did not drink and sorted my aunt's buttons by size because the rattle of tin on what felt like company. In the bedroom, a window I had not opened now stood a finger's width wide. On the sill sat a second loop of blue thread, tied clean and small. I closed the window and set the loop next to the jar. The whistle slid under the eaves like a blade tasting rain. It added a word to my name. Kulme. The storm broke and laid water on the roof, so hard the rafters ticked. In the roar, the whistle went thin and high and turned to metal. Something brushed the window. Not a face, not a hand. A blank place where rain refused to fall. The glass felt cold where it touched. I sang the alphabet very softly until the sound outside lost its shape and slid back down the slope. Then, from farther away, I heard a second whistle. It answered the first badly. They talked over each other, out of time, until the space between them felt like a path I might cross. At dawn, Eli was already on his porch with his thermos, as if he had kept watch over the whole ridge. He said sometimes they argue the way owls argue. It gives you a free night. He told me my aunt had learned to keep her boots on after sundown because you never want to run across a cold floor in bare feet. He told me to get rid of the jar and the thread and water that moves. Objects hold permission. He walked with me to the lake and stood back while I waded in and sank the jar. Bubbles climbed and popped like small promises. I burned the thread over a match. It snapped with a polite click and left ash that the breeze stole at once. The last night, I planned to stay. I set both radios humming. One ran on batteries. One leaned on the generator that coughed and settled and made the lights dim like a field breathing. I put salt on the sills and across the threshold and at the four corners of the room. I practiced my name until it became a shape without meaning. Names cut the air. I did not want mine to cut anything. Dust drew a line across the porch. The first whistle stood at the far end of the line, as if it could see the color leave the wood. At midnight, the cairns on the logging road began to speak to one another. It happens on some nights when the ground is full of old weight. Stone ticked against stone, soft as a lake of beetles. The sound went slow around the cabin, like an animal that had agreed to be careful. The whistle fell back a little, then held. I opened my mouth and said my name one time by accident. It carried through the house and fell against the door where the salt lay bright. Silence came down like a lid. The thing on the porch leaned close to the last inch of space the door could offer. I did not breathe until my lungs hurt. Then the radios caught the signal of a storm warning far off and filled the room with words that had no faces. The lid lifted. Toward morning, the storm peeled away. The thing outside whispered nothing, which was worse than sound. I thought it had gone until the wind shifted and brought me the clean note again, right at the porch step. The knob did not turn. The door did not bow. The radios filled the gaps with weather and late-night talk, and the count of miles a trucker had left before dawn. When light finally came, it came like forgiveness. In the soft powder of salt near the threshold, a single mark sat clean and crisp. Not a print, a touch, as if something had pressed the pad of a question against my floor. I left before noon and drove the gravel slow. At the bend where the road kicks you into your last look back, I stopped and let the engine tick. The cabin sat half-dressed in sunshine. The lake wore the sky like something it had borrowed. I said goodbye, and the ridge said nothing, which felt honest. From the cut where the logging road meets the new blacktop, a thin whistle rose and held and waited for the world to answer. It did not reach me. Not then. I had stacked too many words between it and me. Back in the city, the dark is not one piece. It is perforated by windows and hum and a far siren that threads the blocks like a needle. I keep a radio on the sill because silence now feels like a door left open. When the season begins to tilt, I pour a little line of salt before the door and sweep it up before morning. Some nights, I hear a bottle roll over a stone in the alley, and for half a second my ribs tighten because the sound is almost a whistle. It always fails the last test, and the fear lets go. I still have my aunt's note in my wallet. The edges have softened to fur. Sometimes I take it out at lunch on the steps of a building and read the careful letters because they sound like a person who bunkered down inside herself and still wanted to help someone else cross. Story 2. The Lantern That Walks Without a Man. This is the second story tonight. What would you do if a light moved through the trees with purpose but without a person to guide it, as if the mountain itself had decided to go looking for you? Would you call out to see who needed help? Or would you hold your breath until the light forgot your shape? My name is Aaron. I went into the Appalachians for quiet and came back with a rule I live by. If a lantern looks for you, never let it learn your name. I rented a cabin off a back road that folded into the ridge until my cell signal turned to air. The gravel had a soft way of deciding my speed. Ferns feasted on ditches. The treeline leaned in like neighbors sharing news. The cabin sat on a little cut of ground above a run that sang over stones. It was tidy in the way of places that get repaired one board at a time. Inside, I found a coil stove that growled, a sink that sighed, and a stack of paperbacks whose pages smelled like dust and second chances. The first night, I sat on the porch after the sun left the ridge. Those last minutes of color went slow, like a hand easing out of a sleeve. Fireflies came up in 2s and 3s, not a crowd, just a polite suggestion of other lives. Then, through the black birches, a glow appeared. It moved at the height of a chest. It swung gently without losing its center, the way a lantern swings when the hand is steady. The sound of boots did not follow it. Leaves refused to complain. The glow paused, as if listening, then drifted along the edge of the treeline and vanished behind a hemlock that had been struck by lightning years ago. I told myself it was a hunter. Maybe someone cut through the woods with old gear. Maybe a kid messed with a camping trick. The mind hates a shape without a face. It rushes to dress it in something common. I went to bed with a flashlight on the floor by my hand like a small promise. Morning put a coin of light on the table. I drove down to the gas station that anchored the road to town. The clerk had the kind of steady eyes you get from counting change for people you know by their tires. When I asked about the trail behind my place, he said people hike it, and people sometimes do not finish it. He kept his tone friendly. Then he lowered it just enough to make me lean in. If you see a light moving without sound, he said, do not meet it halfway. He looked like he wished he had not said anything. I bought coffee I did not need and left with the feeling of a quiet warning sitting in my pocket. Back at the cabin, I met my nearest neighbor. Ruth lived farther up the road in a house that knew how to stand against winter. Her porch kept quilts of shadow even at noon. She waved like she was tired and happy to see me at the same time. She told me her father had worked the old tunnel when he was young and broke and proud. She told me the mountain keeps careful books. Some debts get settled and some get carried. A man went missing in the tunnel at the end of shift, lantern on his belt. Nobody saw him leave. They sealed the tunnel years later, but sometimes the light remembers the way out better than a man did. Ruth did not smile when she said it. She pointed at my porch steps and told me to keep a line of plain salt at the bottom one when the days start to shorten. She said glass helps too. Mirrors forget what light is supposed to do when the wrong sort of light looks into them. She told me to hum quietly if the night got busy. Humming keeps your mouth useful without giving your words away. That evening the birches turned black and clean against a thin strip of sky. I washed the plate slow and watched the window for what I hoped would not return. It returned. The lantern slid between trunks, a soft heart of gold, steady and calm. It moved to the edge of my little clearing and held position as if reading the shape of the house. I wanted to call out. The impulse to help is strong when a light looks like it needs a face. I kept my tongue behind my teeth and let the screen hold the higher half of the night back. It circled the clearing once, twice, each pass closer to the steps. I stepped back from the window and it paused. I stepped forward and it crept forward. It mirrored me with the patience of a map learning a town. My scalp prickled. I sat in a chair where I could see without giving my outline to the glass. It took another step and stopped the way a person stops when they find a boundary they did not expect. I looked down at the threshold. In the saw marks, I saw a thin white line. Ruth must have laid salt on the step long before I arrived. The crystals still held shape between fibers of old wood. I wanted to prove I was not afraid of tricks. That is how I made the mirror test. I found a little square mirror in the cabinet above the sink, the kind with pitted silver that makes faces look like ideas. I held it to the window so the lantern would see its own glow. The glass caught the light and fed a second glow back into the night. For a moment, they seemed to agree on where the light should be. Then the reflection slid. It did not move with the mirror. It moved as if it had its own mind, just enough to make my fingers go cold. The real glow stayed steady. The reflected glow leaned toward the house as if thirsty. It was subtle. It was impossible. It was enough. I set the mirror down and laid a fresh line of salt across the bottom, stepped the way Ruth had taught me with her hands. The sound of crystals against what felt like the sentence I could afford to say. The lantern kept its place. It lifted a little, dropped a little, and then I heard the whisper. Not words at first. The sound of someone who finds a door and tries to remember what language the person inside speaks. The whisper gathered syllables until it found a shape that might be my name. It was close, but the vowels were wrong. I hummed a song I did not know that I knew. The sound lined the room with something that felt like cloth. The next afternoon, I walked the old railroad bed that ran behind the cabin. Blackberry thorns reached like friends with bad ideas. The ties had mostly sunk or been stolen for other projects. A half-mile up the grade, the world collapsed a little. The tunnel mouth had been buried in a careful fall of stone, the kind of closure that looks like a plan and a prayer. The air smelled wrong in a familiar way, like a lamp that never cooled. On the ground near the stones, I found the bent frame of a lantern. Rust had eaten its shape, but not its intention. Beside it, a shard of glass caught the sun and held it the way a story holds a point too long. I did not touch any of it. The hairs on my arm stood up on their own. I stood there long enough to feel like I had been counted. My shadow did not fall where it should have. It leaned toward the stones, as if the sun had chosen a slightly different hill to sit on. I backed away until a bird somewhere said something normal and I could breathe again. I walked home slow and kept my eyes on the ground in front of my boots. When I reached the cabin, I cleaned the step of salt and laid a new line, fresh and straight. The world felt hung between breaths. That night the lantern came earlier, as if it had adjusted to my routine. It stood at the foot of the steps and waited. It did not swing much. It did not need to. The glass inside did not catch the trees. It caught the idea of trees and let that idea slide around and around inside the globe. Then came the voice. My father has been gone 6 years. He taught me to fix a clogged sink with what was in the house and to listen to machinery with a hand on the counter. He said first you listen to the sound it makes, then you listen for the sound it should make. From the edge of the clearing, his voice rose, low and patient. Aaron, come help me with the truck light. I was halfway to the door when the sense of wrongness caught up. My father never called it a truck light. He called it a headlight because he liked words to sit in their right chairs. I felt something hot behind my eyes and I stepped back. The voice tried again and rolled my name forward as if it had to push it up a hill. I hummed the nonsense song and my throat shook, but the tone held. The voice shifted and became my sister, then Ruth, then my own voice, like a room that keeps changing paintings when you're not looking. Each time the phrasing was almost right, almost as worse than wrong. The knob twitched as if a hand had found it from a world where metal never warms. The line of salt glowed faintly in the way white things glow when the world remembers what night is for. The lantern drifted up one step and stopped at the exact grain where the salt began. It held there, patient. It did not press. It waited for my mistake. I thought of the tunnel and the sealed stones and the way the old frame had tried to remember what it had been. I thought of a man who had learned his way through black rooms by saying names into the dark and listening for a reply. Hours go long when light stands at your door. I kept the radio on low so that human voices would keep reminding the house it was still a house. The station rose and fell with the weather. Bits of baseball next to farm reports, next to a hymn sung badly by a late-night caller who wanted to send his voice farther than his body could go. The lantern pulsed once for each song that ended, as if marking time, as if measuring me. Near morning, the owls traded shifts, and the sky behind the trees took on the color of a bruise that will heal. The lantern lifted a little and moved back one careful step. The knob went still. The whisper thinned and frayed and became the sound of wet leaves remembering they were leaves. The light withdrew in a line through the birches and vanished behind the lightning tree. I felt my knees only when they remembered to shake. At noon, Ruth came down with a thermos and a face that had decided to be firm. She had heard the night in the way the birds behaved. She told me to pack. She told me the mountain was being polite now and would not keep the manners on lawn. She helped me fold clothes in a way that wasted no motion and made time for stories to be placed between shirts without tearing. She told me some people get marked, not in a way you can photograph, in a way a certain kind of light understands. She put her hand on my arm and told me to keep the places with a lot of noise for a while. The last night came whether I was ready or not. I set every mirror on its face. I unplugged the fridge so the silence would not fracture when the motor kicked in. I laid salt at the threshold and at the edges of the windows where sashes meet the world. I placed a jar of water on the table. The old folks say clear water remembers daylight and will repeat the lesson to anything that listens. I hummed until my voice wore itself to a dull shine. When the last slice of sun left the ridge, the lantern walked out of the birches and came up the path without pause. It knew the steps now. It knew how high to lift, how far to swing, how to set itself before the door like a visitor made of patience. The knob turned once, twice, slow and smooth, as if a careful child practiced the trick of entering without a key. The door held. The wood creaked in the language it learned from winter. The whisper began small. It built itself into sentences that tried to be kind. Aaron, we need your help. Someone is hurt. It named Ruth. It copied her voice with such care that I saw her hands at my sink and felt the touch of her palm again. It named my father. It named me. The the way a person names themselves in a bad dream to find the edges. I'll let the radio speak for me. The late night, host told a trucker to get some rest. The farm report predicted a frost and a good year for pumpkins. A preacher who sounded as tired as I have ever heard a person sound said a line about a lamp under a bowl and laughed in a way that made me forgive him the sermon. The lantern pulsed with each voice like a heart that belonged to the wrong animal. I did not know how long it tried. The night has ways to fold itself into more night. I know the first birds made small remarks and the light began to pale. Not the lantern, the world. The lantern stayed rich in gold and refused to thin. Then something in it gave, as if a hand that had been holding breath finally let the air fall out. It dropped a few inches, hung, and then drifted back from the step with the smallest reluctance I have ever seen a thing express. It hurt to watch it go. That is the worst sentence I have to say. The part of me that wants to help had been dragged across the gravel for hours. It was bleeding. It wanted the night to end in a rescue. Any rescue, even a wrong one. When the sun found the corner of the porch, I opened the door. The salt was damp. The jar of water on the table had a soft ring around its top, as if lips had pressed there and found no purchase. The knob bore a faint mark like frost made by a finger that did not hold heat. I packed. I did not fold as neatly. I thanked the cabin out loud, because naming things you are leaving has power. I locked the door, and then I unlocked it and left it open for a count of 3, because Ruth said some places prefer a small courtesy before you go. The drive out felt longer than the drive in. Every curve looked like a question mark written by someone who enjoys making them. In the rear view, I saw one bright pulse in the birches. It did not chase me. It did not need to. I was already carrying it in the muscles that tighten when a light asks for your attention. The road widened. The radio got fat with stations. The first billboard I saw was for a dentist, and it felt like a hand on the back guiding me across the street. I did not go back. The cabin is someone else's story now. Ruth writes me a letter every fall. She uses a pen that scratches like a small animal. She does not mention the lantern. She talks about coyotes and quilts and the price of feed. Once, near the bottom of a page, she wrote that a hiker had spent a night on her porch without knocking. He had walked in circles on the road for hours and did not know it until his tracks told on him. She gave him coffee, and she made him sleep with the lantern from her barn sitting dark on the table. He left at dawn, and she watched him go the way a person watches a cloud. Sometimes, in the city, I see a flick of light at the corner where the alley meets the street. It is usually a bottle rolling in just the right line to catch a reflection. I know this. I still step one pace to the side so that any curious glow will hit brick instead of me. I keep a bowl of plain salt in the cupboard and a small mirror in a drawer with a cloth over it. I hum when I cannot sleep. The song is nothing. The sound is everything. If you hike at night, do not let your name float out ahead of you. Keep it in your mouth until you have shoulders around you and a light that belongs to a hand you can see. There are lanterns that belong to people, and there are lanterns that belong to places. The second kind waits. It is patient in a way that does not get tired. It will learn your routines. It will learn your outline. It will hold at the edge of your step and practice the knob of your door until it turns clean. To you listening now, if you hear a glow before you see it, if you feel a pull the way you feel a porch light tug at moths, be unhelpful. Be rude to the night. Do not ask who is there. If a loved voice calls to you from the trees, remember how they pronounce the small words, because the small words will tell you the truth. Keep something ordinary handy. Water, salt, a bad radio show in the middle of the night. Fill your room with nonsense. Keep your mouth busy without giving away a single word the dark could use. What if the next light you see is looking for a name to carry back through the trees? And what if it chooses yours? If this story finds you in a quiet room, let the room stay noisy for a while. Let your breath count the seconds until morning. And when you step outside, check the ground for a thin white line. If it is there, leave it. It has already done more than you know. Story 3. The hollow behind the church. This is the third story tonight. What if a church bell rang in the dark without a rope, and each toll spoke a name you had not said in years, a name you had sworn to keep inside your mouth? What if the earth behind the church sank into a bowl that caught voices the way a well catches rain, and every sound climbed back out with someone else's breath wrapped around it? My name is Mara. I went to a small Appalachian town to help archive a century of church records. I left with a copy of a ledger, a quiet scar on my voice, and a rule I repeat when I cannot sleep. Do not answer a bell that counts your steps for you. I took the assignment because paper makes sense when people do not. The church sat where the mountain softened into pasture, white clabbered with a steeple that learned to be humble after too many storms. The signboard out front always had the same message because nobody wanted to climb a ladder every week. Behind the church, a path slipped through sumac and hawthorn to a gate of iron, painted the color of a bruise. The gate looked down into a hollow shaped like a hand. Trees ringed it. The ground in the center wore a shade of green, the first do not see on flatland. The first afternoon, a notice was nailed to the vestry door in handwriting that pressed hard into the paper. Sundown, keep out of the hollow. If the bell rings after dark, cover your ears. Do not count. They call it a hollow, but it is a sink in the bones of the ridge, a place where water chooses to go and stones choose to rest. Flood years tossed fence lines down there like string. Long ago, the church moved the headstones from the lower ground up to the yard by the steps, safer from the spring melt. I learned later that the stones made the trip, and some of the names did, but the bodies did not always have the same luck. The oldest folks keep their voices low when they talk about those years. They say a bell can teach a town to step in time even when the church is shut. The bell rope was gone. The throat of the bell hung above the sanctuary like a mouth that had forgotten what to say. Still, at night, people said they heard it, for slow tolls in the small hours last week. 7 the week before, when a storm took out 2 sycamores by the creek. Patterns that felt like counting, but never to the same number. I slept in a cot in the rectory, thin walls, a window that complained when the wind changed. The first night, a single strike slid through the boards like a finger under a door. I sat up with my hands already on my ears because the notice had told me what to do. The second strike came with a breath at the end that sounded like a vowel. I counted 1 on reflex, then forced my mind to stop moving. The bell let the room go. It ended the way a kettle ends, with a taste of heat and no flame to blame for it. Father Mark ran the place. He wore a jacket, even in warmth, and spoke in the way of someone who has learned that many sentences can be said with 10 words, if the words are right. He thanked me for coming and set 3 rules on the table and kept his hands on them until I nodded. Do not go down into the hollow after sundown. If you hear singing and you cannot see a mouth, do not try to see. If the bell rings, do not count. He showed me the cabinet where the ledgers lived. The key hung from string he wore under his shirt. He said the ledgers were the spine of the church, and that nothing stands without one. He said some towns have 2 spines, and they do not get along. I worked by the window with a pencil behind my ear and the smell of old paste in my nose. Baptisms with dates and sponsors. Marriages that crossed the mountains and brought new names to the list. Deaths that came early when minds took more than coal. The handwriting changed with each decade, but the pressure did not. Every letter was a small nail. When I closed the cabinet the first evening, the blue sky had slid into that color between day and night where the world decides, and I knew I should not go behind the church. I went anyway, because rules that arrive without stories feel like superstition, and superstition always asks to be tested. The gate hinges did not dare to squeal. The path sloped into the hollow, as if it had learned to do so from 1,000 careful feet. Limestone steps showed themselves one at a time when the weeds could not hide them. Cold air exhaled out of the ground and climbed the back of my neck. I stopped when the world told me I had reached the limit of my luck. One bird spoke once and told me nothing. From beyond the tree-line at the far side came a phrase of a hymn, slow and exact, as if sung into a jar and poured out long after the singer left. I'm not someone who scares easily. The truth is that I would not be telling you this if I had taken one more step. Night pushed the color out of the hollow, and the hymn did not return. I climbed out slow and locked the gate because a closed door changes how a dark place thinks. Back in the rectory, I set my notebook on the table and listened to the building settle. The bell rang once. It did not ring the way metal rings when it is struck. It rang the way a voice says a word inside a closed room. The second strike counted a little faster, then the third slowed until the air in my chest tried to match it. I put my hands over my ears. The sound filled my bones first and then asked my skin to help. In the morning, Father Mark placed a small packet of salt by the ledger cabinet. He did not explain it, so I did not ask. Later, when I told him about the hymn and the cold breath of the hollow, he watched the door as if someone who hated small talk was standing just outside. He said there are choruses that do not need mouths because the place itself has learned the tune. He said, do not make a mouth of yourself for a place like that. He said the old stones were moved up the hill in a hurry. He said the bodies were not always invited. That afternoon, my hands shook in the neatest way, which is not helpful when you're copying names that matter. I opened the oldest ledger and found, tucked between pages, a letter that had never decided to be mailed. The ink had bled where a drop of water sat and waited. The writer explained that after the flood of 34, Reverend Ames had a team bring stones up from the hollow with horses and a winch, but that many of the graves had been unmarked for years. The letter said people counted as they lifted and found numbers that did not agree with the list, and then in the evenings the bell took to ringing without permission. In the margin, someone else had written, "Stop counting. You feed it when you count." When the light went honey and long, I sat in the back pew with the ledger open on my lap and felt the room lean around me. I had the key because Father Mark was at the parsonage with a woman who needed a ride to the clinic. I told myself I would stay put. It is embarrassing to talk about how easily I stood and walked toward the back door, past the choir loft that remembered feet even when it was empty. The latch gave. The path behind the church lifted like an eyebrow that already knew the joke. I went to the gate and put my hands on the iron and felt the evening on the other side like a damp cloth. The first voices came soft as the backsides of leaves rubbing together. The choir sang a hymn I know. The melody stayed humble. The words swelled and hushed and pulled in tight again, but no mouths moved because no mouths were there. In the far corner of the hollow, something turned pages at a steady pace, as if the words were being hydrated in order to cross the bowl of air to me. I saw a figure behind the sumac, a shape that suggested a person standing with a book, only the book carried the figure and not the other way around. I stepped back involuntarily and hit the gate with the small on my back. The choir took breath without lungs, and I ran. Back in the rectory, I locked the door and set the ledger on the table and told myself to think. The bell rang once, clean as a winter star. I closed my eyes. The second strike stretched like taffy. The third sounded close enough to taste. I remembered the notes in the ledger and the margin scrawl and the packet of salt. I laid a short line of crystals along the windowsill, and my breathing calmed the tiniest bit, the way a puddle calms when a leaf finally settles. Daylight came with a square of brightness on the floor that a porch vine had not claimed. I asked Father Mark for the key. He nodded as if I'd asked for water. I opened the cabinet and pulled the ledger closer. On page after page, names had been crossed out and moved up, but in the older entries some were crossed out twice. The second crossing was smaller, a careful correction made by someone who understood that mistakes were not always in ink. In the back of the book, a thin paper had been added later, a list that called itself names not found. Most had notes like lost or washed or unknown. One had a note that said speaks at the gate. Another said bell. I copied the list by hand because I wanted to feel what it felt like to write those names. Pencil dug into paper. Soundless decisions about letters turned to weight in my shoulder. In the margin at the bottom of the list, someone had written a small instruction. If the bell counts, answer with names once, but not as an invitation. Speak them like you put stones back where they came from. Do not finish on your own name. Night fell wet and slow. Clouds had the tired look of laundry that will not dry. I put the copied list in my pocket and sat at the back of the church with the real ledger on my knees. The first toll came as the power blinked. The second came as the fluorescent fixture over the vestibule coughed and went dark for good. The third came from behind the church, not above me. The bell was not ringing in the tower. It was ringing in the hollow. I went to the door with the kind of bravery that owes more to foolishness than to heroism. The gate stood open. I did not know who opened it. I know I did not. Lanterns hung at waist height around the rim like bright fruit. They lit a procession. Shoes touched leaves with care. No faces looked up. Hats, shawls, a Sunday suit that had seen workdays. The line stopped where the ground had sunk long ago, right at the place where the steps give up their comfort and ask more out of your knees. The bell tolled a fourth time, and the sound moved through the line like a shiver. Then it said my name, not in a bell voice, in a human voice, placed at the level where a priest says a blessing. It made the vowels clean and the consonants tidy. I did not know if it used my mouth first and carried the shape down the slope. I took the ledger and the list, and I did not go down. I stood at the gate and read the first name on the list. I read it like a finger tracing a carved letter. The bell paused between beats. I read the second, then the third. The procession rustled very slightly. The lanterns did not sway. I understood something small and heavy at the same time. The bell had been counting in years. The tolls were a kind of attendance taken by a place that does not forget, but that needs someone with lungs to make the memory stand up. The counting had become a path, and people had followed it the way you follow a line of stones across a low river. While I read the names, the path did not end. It turned back on itself, slow, like a dog that has been called home by someone it trusts. Halfway down the list, I reached a name that had been spelled two ways in the ledger. The first entry had an E where the second had an A. I read the wrong one first by accident. The bell rang then, with a taste of iron. Several lanterns turned slightly toward me, which is strange to write because light does not turn the way a face turns. I found the other spelling and spoke it carefully. The sound let go of my tongue like a coin that finally drops out of a soda machine after too many tries. The bell went quiet for 3 breaths. The procession leaned inward, and something in the ground exhaled. I did not finish the list. I stopped before the last name because my hand shook, and because the last name on the page looked like mine for the first 3 letters. It was not mine, but it felt too close, and the margin note had warned me not to finish with my own name. I folded the copy in half and slid it back into my pocket. The bell rang once, soft, as if to say we are not done. I agreed silently, because agreement is safer when your mouth is busy with breath. The lanterns dimmed a shade, not all the way, like a room that has decided the party is over but refuses to turn on the bright light yet. The procession began to move again. It did not leave. It shifted. It made a shape like a circle that never closed. I stepped back and closed the gate with my body behind it. The latch fell into place with a sound that made the hair on my arms relax. I locked it because I needed the feel of a simple action in my hands. Dawn ran a finger along the edge of the ridge. A last hole rolled up the slope and hit the church wall in a way that sounded like thanks or like a receipt printed at the end of a long order. Father Mark found me asleep on the back steps with the ledger as a pillow. He did not scold me. He poured coffee into a cup that had no handle and said the bell had been quiet while he made the rounds that morning. He asked nothing else. He had the look of a man who has learned that some stories are stronger if you do not make them stand up and salute. I left 2 days later with a neat copy of the list and a promise to mail a typed version. In the car, I turned the radio low and listened for any sound that was not a sound. A trucker talked about weather west of here. A woman sang about a river that loves everything that falls into it. I kept my hands on the wheel and my attention on the road signs that list distances and nothing more. In the rear view, the steeples slid down out of sight the way a tall guest excuses themselves from a conversation that has grown too long. Back home, I filed the copy of the list in a drawer with envelopes and stamps. Once a month, around the time the moon empties itself onto the sky, I take it out and read 3 names aloud in order soft, with the window open and a bowl of water on the sill. I do not do it to invite anything. I do it because the sound feels like putting stones back in a wall. The bell has not followed me, but sometimes at 2 in the morning a radiator in the building knocks once in a way that makes me sit up, and I hold my breath until the second knock does not come. If you ever find yourself behind a church with a hollow where the ground is too green, if there is a bell without a rope and a rule on a door that does not explain the rule, trust the rule. Do not go down after sundown. Do not look for a mouth when you hear a song. If the bell rings, do not count. Counting is a bridge you build for a place that will walk across you. If a name waits on your tongue, try to keep it there. If you must speak, speak for the ones who could not make the trip up the hill when the stones did. Speak like a mason, not like a mourner. Then close the gate. Some places are kind in a way that scares me. They do not take more than they need. They do not shout. They ask, and then they wait. The hollow behind the church is kind the way the ocean is kind. It does not lie about what it wants. It wants a voice. It wants a count. It wants the names to come home. I will not be the person it uses to bring them all the way. I said a few, and the bell softened, and that is the bit of luck I carry now. What if the next time you hear a bell late at night, it is not from a tower, but from a place that has learned to speak? And what if it says your name with the right vowels and the right weight? Cover your ears. Let the first toll pass. Wait for morning. And when you find a gate that looks down into green, keep it closed. Story 4. The road that shortened behind me. This is the fourth story tonight. What if the road behind you kept getting shorter? Not because you were driving fast, but because something in the dark was rolling it up like a rug and tucking it under your rear bumper. What if every time you checked your mirror, the mile marker you passed sat 2 car lengths closer, then 1, then pressed almost against your license plate like a finger shushing you? My name is Jess. I believed roads obey maps. I believed distance was an honest thing. Then I took a night drive on Appalachian Byway and learned that some miles do not want to be miles. They want to be names. I was hauling 4 archival boxes to a small college library, the kind of place that knows how to keep paper alive. The directions were simple on daylight, not so simple after sundown. The scenic byway curled along the side of a ridge the way handwriting curls when the writer is thinking about something else. The air smelled like wet pine and cool rock. Signs warned of falling stones with the gentle confidence of people who have watched falling stones for years. I was supposed to reach a motel by 10. I did not. It began as such things begin. A mile marker said 117. I checked the time. I checked my gas. I checked my coffee. 20 minutes later, after gentle curves and 1 slow climb, a mile marker on my right said 116. That is how counting works on highways. What made my stomach go small was the next marker. It also said 116. The paint was fresh. Dew turned its white to pearl. I passed it, frowned, and moved on. When I checked the mirror a minute later, the same white rectangle stood closer than it should have been, as if the car had not moved at all and the road had. The gas station on the ridge was a box of light on stilts. I pulled in because I wanted company. The same 2 men sat on the ice chest outside and talked about bait. They did not stop when I parked. They did not stop when I went inside. The cashier rang me up for a bottle of water and a bag of pretzels and told me to drive careful up past switchback 12. I asked how many switchbacks there were. He said 12, and his mouth made a line that suggested he did not care for jokes. I left and drove past a wooden stand that sold peaches to no one at midnight. 10 minutes later, I saw the same gas station again. Same ice chest, same men. The cashier watched me in the mirror above the counter as if the mirror had not been hung for theft at all. The phone had 1 sliver of a bar that fluttered like a moth. I called my aunt because she knows the difference between story and warning. She had a number for a woman named June who keeps rules for the mountain the way other people keep recipes. June answered on the second ring and listened to my description without telling me I was tired. She said 3 things before anything else. Do not say the name of where you're going out loud. Do not take an exit that was not there during the day. Keep a piece of laurel on the dash if you can find any. And keep a jar of running water if you cannot. I said there was a creek near the stand of hemlocks. She told me to fill the water bottle I had just bought and leave the cap loose. Water that has recently moved remembers how to move. It can make a small road inside a big one, if asked kindly. She told me laurel grows in the shade behind pull-offs. She told me to tuck a branch under the visor, even a small one, because laurel does not forget its shape in the dark the way some leaves do. Then she told me not to count mile markers out loud. Counting tells the road you will cooperate. I drove with my mouth closed, which is harder than I like to admit. The white post behind me did not stay behind me. In the mirror, I watched it slide. At first, it hopped in the way of things seen through glass when you hit a bump. Then it drifted with intention, like a chess piece nudged by an impatient opponent. The yellow lines in the middle of the pavement had a ripple to them, a tide line look, as if a long set of hands had been smoothing them forward while I was not watching. A diamond-shaped detour sign leaned against a sawhorse where no crew had any reason to be. It pointed me to a lane that did not exist on my map. The arrow was as sure of itself as a person who has never been wrong in public. I did not want to follow the arrow. I followed it anyway, because rules do not always feel like rules when you are tired and alone, and the nearest motel sits inside a promise you made to yourself. The road narrowed, and the trees pressed close. A sedan idled on the shoulder without shoes of light. I could smell its brakes. The driver's side door was closed. No one sat behind the wheel. My radio turned itself on without sound, and then found a station that had given up on songs and chosen to use its night for weather and birthdays. A voice said names. None were mine. It felt like mercy. The mile markers in the detour had no numbers. They had arrows pointing back the way I had come. I kept the bottle of water in the cup holder and listened to it thrum with the motion of the car. The phone found June again, and she told me exits on a night road are not ramps. They are choices. You will pass places where you could stop and make a smaller problem, she said, but your pride will tell you that distance is better. She told me not to say the name of my motel. She told me to say old names of places I had already been. Say them as if you're calling a dog. Old names have bones the road remembers. The new ones are paint. The shoulder widened into a pull-off with a view that had not seen a sun in hours. I went looking for Laurel with my flashlight and found a branch that fit the visor like it had been made for it. A chorus of frogs counted differently in both ditches. Their timing braided itself with my hazard lights when I stopped to catch my breath. The flashers and the frogs struck into each other and then apart, like two people trying to clap to the same song and failing. Down the grade, I saw taillights. Relief rose and set like a wave. I sped up, then slowed, then saw what I was seeing. The taillights ahead were mine. The bumper was mine. The sticker from a gas station by the interstate was mine. In the glass of the rest area sign, my car glowed where my car should have been. It was the shape of a loop where a loop has no place to be. I had a choice then to pass myself and make the circle tighter, or to let myself go and hold my patience held. I did not pass me. I pulled into the rest area to let the loop move away and to see if I could find length there. The place was lit in a tired way, the kind of light that comes from fixtures that remember long shifts. The vending machines hummed the key of the frogs. They hummed in steps that felt like a countdown. 12, 9, 6, 3. I did not like the idea of arriving at 0 in the glow of soda machine. The map on the wall had an arrow that said you were here. Several towns on the paper had been removed with a blade and a patient hand. The gaps were neat. The names missing were places I had driven through as a child and not since. For a second, I thought about how easy it would be to forget a town on purpose if the mountain wanted you to. I unscrewed the cap on the water. I walked along the tile and poured a line across the aisle from one drain to another. The water moved like it remembered every bed it had ever taken. The hum of the machines wobbled and reset as if a needle picked up and landed on a new groove. I spoke very softly to the floor. Not to the road, to the floor. I said Willow Fork. Then I said it again and let a little doubt dirty the vowels. I said Crooked Run. I said Happy Ridge, which is not known by that name anymore, except by the people who were kind to me in a winter with too much snow. I called those names the way you call a dog who is under the porch and afraid of thunder. The hum lost count. It restarted on a safer number. I closed the bottle and stepped out into a night that had reshaped itself to consider me. June told me to buy distance. She meant it. At the next crossroads, I emptied my pockets of coins and tossed them one by one toward the center of the four ways. I did not aim for the lines. I aimed for the idea of choice, small bright circles landing where choice is not. Each coin sounded like a drop of water if a drop of water could be made of dirt and portraits and promises. The mile marker behind me stopped moving for the first time since I noticed it. Then, like a deer that had been spooked, it jumped forward on the shoulder to where it should have been if the road had behaved. I laughed in a way that did not feel healthy. The road kept trying. Detour arrows multiplied. They pointed to lanes that had existed during the day and to lanes that had only ever existed on paperwork never filed. I followed the main line by pretending I had written it myself when I was small and practicing curvy letters. I said old names with care. I said them backwards when the air grew tight. Willow Fork became Croft Woolley, not because backward names are magic, but because backward names are hard for the mouth that hunts you. The bottle of water stood open on the dash and made a tiny rainstorm inside itself each time I hit a ripple. Sometime in the hours that forget to hang a number on themselves, the road tried to be two roads at once. The white lines multiplied. I chose the set that had fewer bugs sleeping on them. Bugs know which pain is oldest. They trust it. The mile markers continued their trick of sliding where they had no right to slide. Then, as the sky thought about loosening, they began to behave. They leapt in fits and starts to numbers that matched the map that had been printed by people with staplers and patience. The loop ahead that had been me fell away, and only I remained. At the last turn before the river bridge, the byway went shy. It wanted to hide in timber and let me miss it. The laurel branch on the visor brushed my knuckles, as if to remind me that a plant can be a compass if you decide it is. I stopped on the shoulder and poured the last of the bottle across the lane behind me, one thin line from center stripe to gravel. It felt childish. It felt like drawing a chalk line to keep a sleepover ghost at bay. The road respected it. For a moment, the paint looked wet, even where no water had touched it. The line behind me did not shorten. The bridge sang when my tires rolled onto it. Bridges carry their own rules, and the road obeyed them because bridges are not roads at all. They are choices built in public. Birds tried out mourning on the wires. The sky turned the color of first tea. The river said yes to the rock and no to the banks and made a sound I'd wanted to hear all night. On the far side of the span, an honest sign said welcome and then the name of a county that had never wanted to change its name and had not. I made the library before the world got loud. I carried the boxes into a building that loved climate as more than weather. I told the archivist that the drive had been long and beautiful. I told no lies besides that. On the way out, I saw a campus map behind glass that still had the old name of a trail printed in tiny letters where no one would notice unless they wanted to. I noticed. Back in my car, I tucked the laurel branch into the glove box with a label to remind me to change it every season. I put a roll of coins by the parking brake. I filled a jar with tap water and poured it out and filled it again so it would remember that it was meant to move. I wrote the rule on an index card in the tidy voice my high school teachers fought to teach me. Do not say where you are going after dark. Say where you have been and say it like you mean it. By distance with things that glitter and with names that used to be true. Keep Laurel nearby. Keep water honest. If you're listening in a dim room and you have a drive coming, plan for it like you plan for sleep. Night roads like company that pays attention. Keep an eye on mile markers, but watch your mirror more than your clock. If a post behind you begins to behave like a pet that wants to be in your lap, give the road a task that keeps it busy. Sing old names until the sound becomes a fence. Toss coins at the center where all the choices touch. Pour a line of water when the path tries to fold itself into fewer options. The mountain is old, but it respects craft. What if the next time you take a byway at night, the miles refuse to add up the way you expect, and the town you knew has loaned its name to a newer sign? You can still get where you're going. You just have to talk to the road like it is alive, and you have to remember that some nights it is. Keep your mouth closed when pride wants to tell the dark your plans. Use your breath for names the road cannot weaponize. And if you pass a gas station twice, wave the second time. Let it know you realize your mistake, and you intend to be polite anyway. Story 5. The house that waited with its lights off. This is the 5th story tonight. What if a house could decide when to live and when to sleep, choosing its own pulse and holding its breath with the lights off until the next visitor made the mistake of waking it? What if every bulb in its ceilings was not comfort, but a fuse that told the walls to remember? My name is Daniel. Last spring, I drove into the mountains to claim a farmhouse I did not know I owned. I came back with one rule that I say in every strange room before I sleep. Never switch a place on if it prefers to be dark. The deed came in a tired envelope with a courthouse stamp that bled in rain. Inside lay a key in a yellow foam sleeve and a note in my uncle's blunt hand. Let's stay dark. He had no children and fewer friends. He did not call. He did not explain. The road to the property turned to gravel, then to packed dirt, then to twin ruts that decided for me where the tires would go. Pines leaned in and drew the light low. When the trees parted, the house sat with its porch almost touching the grass, as if the earth had been lifting to meet it for years. The clapboards wore long curls of paint that remembered winter. The windows offered back the sky and my car instead of showing rooms. The lock had seen more hands than mine, and none had trusted it. The key fought the pins until the latch let go with a breath like a person who has decided to speak. Inside, there was no vinegar of mold, no soap, no lemon oil. The air smelled like a theater a week after a play closes. The set remains. The audience has gone home. Masking tape covered every light switch in the hall and in the kitchen and under the stairs. Each strip carried the same blunt handwriting. Do not use. I put my bag on the kitchen table and let the flashlight pick the world. The beam found wallpaper the color of weak tea and a calendar frozen on a month with sheep. It found a bowl on the counter holding marbles and a loose screw and a paperclip shaped like a heart. It found a mirror the size of a serving tray by the back door. I did not like the mirror, which is another way of saying the mirror did not like me. My reflection moved a fraction late, like a video call with bad signal. I turned it to face the plaster and set the bowl against one corner so the glass would mind its manners. In town, the diner poured coffee that tasted like tin and late shifts. I asked about the place on Dry Branch Road. Forts paused on plates. A man 2 stools down said the only sentence anyone would risk. Never flip the switches. He did not look up when he said it. He studied his hands like tools that broke when it mattered. At the hardware store, I bought batteries and a roll of black electrical tape. The owner told me to keep a radio that runs even when the power does not. He sat on the counter and said, "Pay me next time." There was no next time planned. We both let that settle. Night felt like a sheet thrown over furniture. Field crickets stitched the yard together. I unrolled a blanket in the front room and told my eyes to accept the small circle of light my flashlight made. Houses tell lies to win your trust. Settling wood, a pipe shrugging, a fridge remembering itself. This house told none of those. It held a long quiet like a hell breath. In that quiet, my own breath sounded like trespass. I lay there and listened to the distance between footsteps I was not taking. I decided to be gentle with the dark. I decided the tape was smarter than pride. Curiosity is the hinge on which bad nights swing. After midnight, my hand found a switch at the end of the hall, tape and all. I lifted a corner. The sound was a healed scab you should have left alone. I pressed the switch with one finger the way you test a bruise. The bulb on the ceiling answered with a single steady glow. Not yellow, not white, the color of an old tooth underwater. In that light, the shadows did not retreat. They turned toward me like cats that have decided I might feed them. The baseboard line turned into a mouth. The corners leaned in as if the room had changed opinions. The switch clicked off by itself. Not a soft fall, a slap, as if a hand on the other side had grown impatient. The bulb cooled with a sound that reminded me of icy gravel under a boot. The dark returned the way the sea returns to a footprint. The house felt relieved. That is the closest word I have. It felt the way a fever feels when it breaks and the body finally lowers itself back into sleep. I took my hand away from the switch and swore by the tape. Then the floorboards reported my movement room to room. Each board told the next board where I had put my weight. Together, they whispered my outline faster than I could change it. My beam showed the usual shadows I could name and one I could not, a long dim shape that lay along the baseboard and followed the light with a small thoughtful delay. Morning arrived like a decision the house made for me. I found the attic ladder and pulled it down in a small rain of dust. Heat had collected up there and learned to sit. Trunks waited with the calm of animals that know who owns them. The second trunk held journals tied with twine that had kept its knot longer than some marriages. The entries reached back before my uncle had the deed. Different hands, same bones, nights, and what the house did when you forced it to behave like any other house. One page described a lamp that burned cold. Another listed 3 rules. Let it sleep. Do not finish a mirror. Do not finish a circuit. A later page held one more line that I did not understand until midnight. Do not finish a name. I carried the stack down and set it on the kitchen table under the square of noon light. The pages smelled like old glue and a little like hay. I read until the sun slid behind the pines and the field became a flat, dark sea. I folded a towel across the back door mirror and taped the towel to the frame. I wedged the bowl of marbles against a corner so glass would mind its manners. Then I read the rules aloud once, not for magic, but for memory. The sound of my voice made the room feel like a room again and not a mouth. Footsteps crossed the porch in the careful pattern of someone who knows where the loose boards are. They paused at the door. The knob turned a fraction, then stopped like a thought that found a cliff. In the window, a face appeared that had my features, but not my timing. It smiled when I did not. It blinked late. It did not fog the pain. I opened a journal at random and read the rules again. Let sleep. Do not give it your face. Do not finish a mirror. Do not finish a circuit. Do not finish a name. The knob unwound its ambition. The face forgot my arrangement in slow inches. The porch exhaled the way a person does when they lose a small argument. The quiet afterward recorded my breath like snow. I slept in shallow strips. A little after 2, the steps returned and moved past the door, along the wall, and under the window. I followed with the flashlight and saw what light can show when it is honest. The dew on the grass ended in a narrow line that looked like a path made of warm air. The beam found no body at its head. It found a place the night refused to cool. I backed away until the wall met my shoulders like a shore. Then I read the rules again to remind the house that I knew them. When the sun put a coin of light on the floor, I walked the fence line and checked the gates. The world outside worked. The world inside argued. The tape over the hall switch lay flat again, as if licked back into place. A new switch had appeared inside the closet by the back door. Its plate did not match the others. The screws looked chewed. I did not touch it. At the diner, the waitress handed me eggs in a box without being asked and kept glancing at the window behind me. She said that sometimes a house eats a person without chewing, and sometimes it just learns their timing. She slipped a roll of black tape into the bag and told me no charge. The hardware owner lent me a battery radio and told me to bring it back if I could. I tried to leave that afternoon. I locked the door because city habits make locks into rituals. The gravel road stretched like taffy. The stand of sycamores that should have shown up at minute 2 took 10. The highway was a mirage of heat it did not have. The clock on the dash paused. The headlights flickered once, even though the day was bright. The world said, "Not yet," in a voice that made patience feel like survival. I turned back because the only thing worse than obeying was pretending I did not hear. The house stood closer to the road, or else my sense of yard had thinned. Every strip of tape on every switch had lifted at one corner. 2 new switches had appeared where there had been bare wall. The hum began, low at first, the way a transformer sings at noon. It rose a half step and settled. The plaster relaxed the way a face relaxes when it recognizes someone. Air moved without vents. The floor softened. I read the rules aloud again, not as a charm, but as a way to occupy the part of me that liked to panic in tidy spirals. Let it sleep. Do not finish a mirror. Do not finish a circuit. Do not finish a name. The house tested my work with a draft that felt like a paw. It stepped back and left the black line of tape alone. The outlets along the counter cracked in tiny, identical voices. The bulb over the sink smiled a dry little smile without light. A cupboard opened and closed to show me what closing feels like when I am not the one who does it. Paper slid a fraction in the attic and misaligned the stack. I did not climb the ladder, looking as a kind of switch. I kept reading until my voice felt like a fence. The reflection in the back door glass returned. It waited for me to speak. I kept my mouth still until my jaw ached. It fogged the glass with a breath I could not share. It tried my name and got the weight of it wrong. I'm a nonsense tune. I used the coax dogs to drop stolen shoes. The reflection tilted its head like a bird and stopped trying. Rain arrived without thunder and softened the hum until the house sounded like a field of insects in high summer. I made tea on a camp stove and listened to the water agree with the metal in polite clicks. In the attic, a trunk waited at the farthest bay. I pulled it free and found ledgers that were not for crops and not for tithes. They were the house's ledgers, kept by people who understood that structures keep score. Dates, switches thrown, nights saved by sleeping elsewhere, nights kept in exchange for light. One page told a story in verbs only. Entered, waited, seen, replaced, missing. The final page held a small instruction in a neat hand. If you must speak, let the words be rules and not names. Names close circuits, rules open them. Toward morning the hum dwindled to the level of wind in leaves. The switches were their tape like humble clothes. The reflection in the glass returned to my timing and stayed in my side of the world. I packed, slow with attention. Speed is a kind of switch. I left the journals in a square on the table with the cords laid across like a belt. I left a bowl of water in the middle because if pages have a thirst, I wanted them to drink. I left the bathroom mirror turned. I left the tape in the drawer under the sink and wrote on the wood in pencil. Leave the switches sleeping. At the diner, the waitress saw me and knew. She poured coffee I did not ask for and slid a paper bag across the counter. Inside sat a roll of tape and a flashlight with new batteries. The hardware owner lent me a radio and told me to forget the price. At the post office, I mailed the key back to the lawyer with a note asking him to give the land to the trust or to someone who understands that a warning is not a dare. Now, in any motel, I walk the room and lay tape across every switch like a small prayer with glue. I bring a lamp I know and treat mirrors as mouths that should not be fed. I leave one plug empty. I answer questions in the dark with rules and not with my name. If you're hearing this in a quiet room, let the room stay gentle and do not invite brightness you did not bring. If you find switches taped over, leave them taped. If a mirror feels too interested, turn it. If a house hums like a throat clearing, answer with rules or not at all. What if the next light you summon arrives with the color of old bone and the shadows turn toward you as if you were their sunrise? Do not feed that. Keep company with the kind dark. Leave while you're still a guest.